A chance encounter. Claire sat on the park bench, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. The wedding invitation glowed on the screen, mocking her with its elegant script. Her daughter Rebecca was getting married in 3 hours, and Claire had just received a text from her ex-husband saying he'd be bringing his new girlfriend to the ceremony. 25 years of marriage, ended 2 years ago, and she still wasn't over the humiliation. The thought of walking into that reception alone while he paraded his new life made her stomach twist. She imagined the whispers, the sideways glances, the well-meaning friends who would ask if she was seeing anyone, their voices dripping with pity. Claire had tried everything to prepare herself for this day. She'd gone to therapy, practiced affirmations in the mirror, bought a new dress that made her feel beautiful. But none of it seemed to matter now as she sat here, frozen with anxiety, unable to take the next step toward the church. She looked up and saw a man sitting on the next bench, scrolling through his phone with a coffee in hand. He was distinguished looking, maybe in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a well-tailored navy suit. There was something kind about his face, something that made her do the unthinkable. Claire stood up, her legs feeling like jelly beneath her. She smoothed her pink dress with shaking hands and walked over to him, each step feeling like a small act of courage. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man looked up from his phone, his blue eyes curious but gentle. He had the kind of face that had seen life, weathered storms, but somehow remained open and warm. "I know this sounds absolutely insane," Claire continued, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "In fact, I'm not even sure I'm really doing this. But I need to ask you something, and please, please don't think I'm completely out of my mind." The man set down his coffee and gave her his full attention, waiting patiently for her to continue. "My daughter is getting married today," Claire said, the words tumbling out faster now. "It should be one of the happiest days of my life, and it is, truly it is. But my ex-husband will be there with his new partner, and I just can't bear the thought of walking in there alone and facing all those pitying looks from people who remember us as a couple." She took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of courage she had left. "Would you consider pretending to be my date for the afternoon? Just for a few hours. I'll pay you whatever you think is fair. I just need someone by my side so I don't feel so pathetically alone." The man set down his coffee and stood up slowly. He was tall, with a presence that commanded respect, yet his expression remained warm and understanding. He studied her face for a moment, not with judgment, but with something that looked like compassion. "I'm David," he said, extending his hand. "And you don't need to pay me anything." Claire felt tears spring to her eyes. "Really? You'd do that for a complete stranger? You must think I'm desperate." "I think you're brave," David said softly. "It takes courage to ask for help, especially from someone you don't know. My mother once told me that kindness doesn't need a reason, and that we're all just walking each other home in this life. Besides, I have nowhere else to be today. I'd be honored to help you through this." Claire felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means to me." As they walked to Claire's car, she found herself talking more freely than she had in months. Maybe it was easier to open up to a stranger, someone who didn't know her history, who wouldn't judge her for still feeling wounded after 2 years. She told him about Rebecca, about how proud she was of the woman her daughter had become. Rebecca was a pediatric nurse, compassionate and strong, with her father's determination and her mother's heart. She'd found a good man, someone who truly loved her, and Claire was genuinely happy for her daughter's joy. She told him about the divorce, about how it had blindsided her. One day they were planning their retirement, talking about traveling together, and the next day Robert was telling her that he'd fallen out of love, that he needed something different, someone who made him feel young again. The worst part wasn't the leaving, Claire admitted as they drove toward the church. It was feeling like I'd wasted all those years building a life with someone who could just walk away so easily. Like I was replaceable, like everything we'd shared meant nothing. David listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that showed he was truly paying attention. He didn't offer empty platitudes or try to fix her pain. He just listened, and somehow that was exactly what she needed. "Do you have children?" Claire asked, realizing she'd been talking about herself for 15 minutes straight. "A son," David said. "James. He's 30 now, living in Seattle. He's a marine biologist, spends most of his time on research vessels studying ocean conservation. I don't see him as often as I'd like, but when we do connect, it's meaningful. He's doing work that matters, and I'm proud of him. That must be hard, having him so far away." "It is," David admitted. "But I learned that loving someone means letting them follow their own path, even when that path takes them away from you." They arrived at the church with 20 minutes to spare. The parking lot was already filling with cars, and Claire could see guests in their finest clothes making their way inside. Her anxiety spiked immediately, her breath coming in short gasps. David must have sensed it because he gently took her hand. "Just breathe," he said. "You're stronger than you think. And remember, you're not doing anything wrong. You're here to celebrate your daughter's happiness. That's all anyone needs to know." Claire nodded, trying to steady her breathing. "What if people ask how we met? What if they can tell we're not really together?" "We met in the park," David said with a gentle smile. "Which is true. As for the rest, let me handle any uncomfortable questions. Your only job today is to be present for Rebecca and to let yourself feel joy for her." "Can you do that?" "I can try," Claire said. They walked into the church together, and Claire was surprised by how natural it felt to have David by her side. He placed his hand lightly on the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd with quiet confidence. Several of Claire's friends approached, their eyes widening with curiosity when they saw her with this handsome, distinguished stranger. "Claire, you look beautiful," her friend Patricia said, unable to hide her interest in David. "And who is this?" "This is David," Claire said, feeling a flutter of nervousness. "David, this is Patricia. We've been friends since college." David shook Patricia's hand with genuine warmth. "It's lovely to meet you. Claire has told me so much about the wonderful friends who've supported her." Patricia beamed, clearly charmed. "Well, it's wonderful to finally meet someone who appreciates our Claire. She deserves all the happiness in the world." As they took their seats, Claire felt herself relaxing slightly. David's presence beside her was reassuring, solid in a way that made her feel less fragile. The ceremony was beautiful. Rebecca looked radiant in her white gown, the veil cascading down her back like a waterfall of lace. When she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, Claire felt her heart swell with love and just a tiny pang of sadness that she wasn't the one walking beside her daughter in this moment. But David squeezed her hand gently, as if he understood, and somehow that small gesture made it bearable. Rebecca's vows were heartfelt and genuine, speaking of partnership and growth, of choosing each other every day. Claire cried tears of joy watching her daughter marry the man she loved. David sat beside her, offering his handkerchief when she needed it, and somehow his presence made everything feel manageable. When the ceremony ended and guests began making their way to the reception hall next door, Claire felt her anxiety return. This was where she'd have to face Robert and his girlfriend, where she'd have to make small talk and pretend everything was fine. The reception hall was decorated beautifully, with soft lighting and flowers everywhere. Claire and David found their table, and she was relieved to see she'd been seated with her sister Linda and her husband, along with some of Rebecca's friends from nursing school. Linda pulled Claire aside immediately. "Who is that gorgeous man you brought? And why didn't you tell me you were seeing someone?" "It's complicated," Claire said, not wanting to lie to her sister but not ready to explain the truth either. "Well, he seems wonderful," Linda said with a knowing smile. "And I haven't seen you look this relaxed in years. Maybe complicated is exactly what you need." As the cocktail hour progressed, Claire found herself actually enjoying the event. David was wonderful company, engaging everyone at their table in conversation, asking thoughtful questions, and sharing stories that made people laugh. He had a way of making everyone feel seen and heard. Then she saw Robert across the room, his girlfriend clinging to his arm. The girl couldn't be more than 35, with long dark hair and a figure that made Claire feel invisible by comparison. Robert caught her eye and began walking over, and Claire felt her stomach drop. "Claire," Robert said stiffly when he reached their table. "You look well." "Thank you, Robert," Claire replied, feeling David's reassuring presence beside her. "This is David." "David, this is Robert, Rebecca's father." David stood and extended his hand, his posture confident but not aggressive. "Robert, it's good to meet you. You must be very proud. Rebecca is a remarkable young woman." The two men shook hands, and Claire noticed Robert's expression shift from condescension to something resembling respect. David had a quiet authority about him, a self-assurance that came from years of experience and accomplishment, though he wore it lightly. "And this is Amber," Robert said, introducing his girlfriend. Amber smiled nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Claire realized with surprise that she felt sorry for the young woman. Whatever fantasy Amber had about dating an older, established man, she'd eventually learn what Claire had learned, that Robert was someone who always needed something new to feel alive. "It's nice to meet you," Claire said graciously, and she meant it. This young woman wasn't her enemy. She was just another person trying to find happiness in an uncertain world. As Robert and Amber moved on to greet other guests, Linda leaned over and whispered, "Did you see Robert's face? He looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. I don't think he expected you to move on so well." Claire smiled despite herself. Maybe that was petty, but it felt good to not be the pitiful ex-wife for once. As the evening progressed, David proved to be wonderful company. When the band started playing, he asked her to dance during a slow song. Claire hesitated. It had been so long since she'd danced with anyone, but David guided her onto the floor with gentle confidence. "You're doing great," he said softly as they swayed to the music. "I know this isn't easy, but look at you. You're here, you're present, and you're celebrating your daughter's joy. That takes real strength. I couldn't have done it without you," Claire admitted. "I would have hidden in the bathroom half the night." David laughed, a warm sound that made her smile. "I doubt that. I think you would have found your courage eventually. I just helped speed up the process." As they danced, David began sharing stories from his own life, making her laugh with tales of business trips gone wrong and the time he accidentally gave a presentation with his shirt on inside out and didn't notice until lunch. "The worst part," he said with a self-deprecating grin, "was that no one told me. An entire boardroom of executives, and not one of them mentioned it. I only discovered it when I went to the restroom and saw myself in the mirror." Claire laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like months. "What did you do?" "I went back in and opened the next session by saying, I appreciate everyone's discretion about my fashion choices this morning. It takes a secure man to wear his shirt inside out to a board meeting." Everyone cracked up, and somehow it became this bonding moment. Sometimes our imperfections are what make us human. During dinner, David treated Claire's mother and sister with such charm that they kept asking where she'd been hiding him. Her mother, usually reserved and hard to impress, actually giggled at one of David's stories. "Claire, don't let this one get away," her mother whispered when David excused himself to take a phone call. "He's a keeper." Claire felt a complicated mix of emotions. She was grateful for David's kindness, but she also felt guilty about the deception. These people thought she'd found someone special, when really she'd asked a stranger to play a part. When Rebecca came over to their table during a break in the dancing, glowing with happiness in her wedding dress, Claire felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Mom," Rebecca said, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Thank you for being here. I know today couldn't have been easy with Dad and everything. I wouldn't have missed it for the world," Claire said honestly. "You look absolutely beautiful, sweetheart." Rebecca glanced at David, who was chatting with Claire's brother-in-law. "I'm so glad you brought someone, Mom. You deserve to be happy too. He seems wonderful." Claire felt a lump in her throat. "He is wonderful. I worried about you so much after the divorce," Rebecca admitted quietly. "You seemed so lost, so hurt. But seeing you tonight, you seem more like yourself again. Lighter somehow." "I'm getting there," Claire said, hugging her daughter close. "And watching you start this new chapter of your life reminds me that endings can also be beginnings." As the reception continued into the evening, Claire found herself relaxing more and more. She danced with old friends, laughed at the best man's speech, and even managed a civil conversation with Robert about Rebecca's honeymoon plans. As the reception wound down and the evening grew late, Claire and David found themselves alone on the terrace outside the reception hall. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and there was a gentle breeze that carried the scent of roses from the garden. "Thank you," Claire said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "You have no idea what today would have been like without you. I probably would have spent the whole time hiding in corners, trying to avoid everyone." David smiled, leaning against the terrace railing. "I should be thanking you, Claire. I haven't felt this alive in a long time." "What do you mean?" He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "My wife passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. It was a long battle, and by the end, we were both ready for her suffering to end. But the grief afterward, it swallowed me whole." Claire reached out instinctively, touching his arm. "I'm so sorry, David. I had no idea. How could you?" he said with a sad smile. "We just met a few hours ago. But that's part of why I agreed to help you today. Since Catherine died, I've thrown myself into work, avoiding anything that might make me feel too much. I attend meetings, make decisions, go through the motions of living, but I haven't really been present for any of it." He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the sunset. "Today reminded me what it's like to connect with someone, to be present for another person's joy and struggles. You gave me a gift without even realizing it. Life has a funny way of bringing people together when they need each other most," Claire said softly. "Though I have to admit, I never imagined when I woke up this morning that I'd spend my daughter's wedding with a complete stranger who'd turn out to be exactly what I needed." David laughed. "I came to this park today because it was the anniversary of Catherine's death. I couldn't face being alone in my apartment, but I also couldn't face being around people who knew me, who would look at me with pity or try to cheer me up. So I sat on that bench, staring at my phone, wondering if I'd ever feel anything again besides this dull, constant ache. And then I walked up and asked you the strangest question you'd ever heard, Claire finished. The strangest and bravest, David corrected. Do you know how much courage it takes to ask a stranger for help? Most people would rather suffer alone than risk rejection or judgment. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky. Claire felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. Not the numbness she'd been living with, but actual peace, a quiet acceptance of where she was in her life. Can I tell you something? Claire said. When Robert first told me he was leaving, I thought my life was over. Not literally, but I couldn't imagine a future without him. We'd built everything together, our home, our family, our entire lives. I didn't know who I was without him. And now, David asked gently, now I'm starting to realize that maybe losing him was the beginning of finding myself again. Not the young woman who got married at 23, but the person I am now, with all my experiences and scars and hard-won wisdom. David nodded thoughtfully. Catherine used to say that we spend the first half of our lives becoming who we think we're supposed to be, and the second half unlearning all of that and discovering who we actually are. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was, David said with a smile that was both sad and fond. She taught me that love isn't about possession or completion. It's about witnessing each other's becoming, about being a safe harbor while the other person explores their own depths. As they walked back inside, the reception was winding down. Guests were beginning to leave, and Rebecca and her new husband were preparing to depart for their hotel before their honeymoon flight the next morning. Claire hugged her daughter goodbye, holding her close and breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, the same shampoo she'd used since she was a teenager. I love you, Mom, Rebecca whispered. Thank you for everything. I love you too, sweetheart. Be happy. That's all I've ever wanted for you. As Claire and David walked to the parking lot, she felt the weight of the day settling on her shoulders. It had been emotionally exhausting, but in the best possible way. She'd faced her fears and survived. More than survived, she'd actually enjoyed herself. Would you like me to drive you home? David offered. You must be exhausted. That would be nice, Claire admitted. Though I'm not ready for this day to end quite yet. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the city lights twinkling around them. Claire found herself studying David's profile, this kind stranger who'd given her such an unexpected gift. Can I ask you something? She said finally. Why did you really agree to come with me today? You could have easily said no, made an excuse, avoided the whole awkward situation. David was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. When you walked up to me in the park, I saw something in your eyes that I recognized. Fear, yes, but also determination. You were terrified, but you were going to face it anyway. That takes real courage. He glanced at her briefly before returning his eyes to the road. And honestly, I've been telling myself for 3 years that I need to start living again, that Catherine would want me to be happy. But I couldn't figure out how to take the first step. You gave me an easy way back into the world. No pressure, no expectations, just showing up for another human being. It reminded me that connection doesn't always have to be complicated or heavy. Sometimes it can just be simple kindness. When they arrived at Claire's house, a modest colonial in a quiet neighborhood, David walked her to the door like a proper gentleman. This is me, Claire said, suddenly feeling shy. Thank you again for today. I don't think I can ever adequately express what it meant to me. You already have, David said warmly. Every time you laughed tonight, every moment you allowed yourself to be present and joyful despite your fear, you thanked me. He hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. I'd like to see you again, if you're open to it. A real date this time, not a pretend one. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people who enjoyed each other's company, seeing where it might lead. Claire took the card, her heart fluttering in a way she thought she'd forgotten. She looked at it and felt her eyes widen. The card read, David Morrison, Chief Executive Officer, Morrison Technologies. You're a CEO, she said, surprised. David smiled sheepishly. I didn't mention it because I wanted you to know me as just David, not as my title or my position. Too often, people treat me differently when they know about my work. But yes, I run a technology company that develops sustainable energy solutions. Claire laughed, shaking her head in disbelief. I asked a CEO to be my fake date to my daughter's wedding. Of all the people in that park, I chose one of the most successful businessmen in the city. You chose someone who needed to be asked, David corrected gently. The title doesn't matter. What matters is that we connected as human beings. I'd like that, Claire said, clutching the card. I'd like to see you again very much. 3 months later, Claire and David were having dinner at a small Italian restaurant, the kind of cozy neighborhood place with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. It had become their favorite spot, a place where they could talk for hours without being interrupted. Claire had learned so much about David in those months. She learned that he was passionate about environmental conservation, that he'd started his company after Catherine's cancer was potentially linked to industrial pollution in their old neighborhood. She learned that he could cook but rarely did, that he loved old jazz music, and that he volunteered at a cancer support center every Tuesday evening. And David had learned about Claire. He learned that she was a retired high school English teacher who still tutored students on weekends. He learned that she loved gardening but was terrible at keeping houseplants alive. He learned that she wrote poetry in a journal she never showed anyone, and that she had a wicked sense of humor that only emerged when she felt truly comfortable. I have something to confess, Claire said over dessert one evening. Oh no, you're actually married to someone else and I've been the other man this whole time. David teased. Claire laughed. No, nothing like that. It's about the day we met. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, about what might have happened if I hadn't walked up to you, if I'd let my fear win and gone to the wedding alone. What made you do it? David asked. What made you take that risk with a complete stranger? Desperation, partly, Claire admitted. But also, I think part of me knew that I'd reached a turning point. I could either stay stuck in my pain and fear, or I could take a leap of faith. Even if you'd said no, even if the whole thing had been a disaster, at least I would have tried. David reached across the table and took her hand. Do you know what I was thinking about when you walked up to me that day? What? I was thinking about all the things Catherine and I had planned to do together that we never got to. We were going to travel, see the world, take up ballroom dancing. But we kept putting it off. Always saying we'd do it next year, when work was less busy, when we had more time. And then suddenly there was no more time. His voice grew thick with emotion. I was sitting there, drowning in regret, when you appeared and asked me for help. And something in me recognized that this was one of those moments Catherine always talked about, where life offers you a choice. I could say no and stay safe in my grief, or I could say yes and see where it led. And where has it led? Claire asked softly. David smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she'd grown to love. To the best 3 months I've had in years. To rediscovering that my heart still works, that I can feel joy and excitement and hope again. To meeting an extraordinary woman who makes me want to be fully alive again. Claire felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were good tears, healing tears. I was so broken when we met. I didn't think I'd ever feel whole again." "You were never broken," David said firmly. "You were wounded, yes, but wounds heal. And sometimes they heal stronger than they were before." As they left the restaurant that night, walking hand in hand through the quiet streets, Claire thought about all the unexpected turns her life had taken. The painful divorce that had felt like the end of everything. The terrifying moment of asking a stranger for help. The gradual awakening of her heart to new possibilities. She'd learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. That kindness from strangers can change your life in ways you never imagined. That endings really can be beginnings, if you're brave enough to let them. And David had learned that honoring the dead doesn't mean stopping your own life. That love isn't a finite resource that runs out when you lose someone. That opening your heart again isn't a betrayal, it's a testament to the love you were taught by those who came before. 6 months after that first meeting in the park, David asked Claire to marry him. Not because either of them needed to be rescued or completed, but because they'd discovered that two whole people can create something even more beautiful together. Rebecca cried happy tears when Claire told her the news, thrilled that her mother had found love again. And Claire's mother, who'd worried so much about her daughter's lonely future, declared it the most romantic story she'd ever heard. On their wedding day, a small intimate ceremony with just family and close friends, Claire thought about that moment in the park when she'd been trembling with fear and uncertainty. She'd had no idea that asking one simple question would change the entire trajectory of her life. As she and David exchanged vows, promising to witness each other's becoming and be safe harbor for each other's journeys, Claire felt a deep sense of gratitude. Not just for finding David, but for finding herself again. For learning that it's never too late to be brave, never too late to ask for help, never too late to begin again. And David, looking into Claire's eyes as he slipped the ring onto her finger, felt Catherine's presence like a warm blessing. He'd kept his promise to her, to keep living fully, to keep his heart open to all the beauty and pain and wonder that life offers. Two broken people, meeting by chance in a moment of desperate courage, had found their way back to wholeness. Not because they completed each other, but because they'd learned to be whole on their own first, and then chosen to share that wholeness with each other. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask a stranger for help. And sometimes, that stranger turns out to be exactly what you needed, not to rescue you, but to remind you of your own strength, your own capacity for courage, your own ability to write a new chapter in your story. Life has a funny way of bringing people together when they need each other most. And the best things in life often come from the moments when we're willing to set aside our fear, take a chance on kindness, and simply show up for another human being. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales of kindness, courage, and second chances. Leave a comment below telling us about a time when a stranger's kindness changed your life, or when you took a brave step that led you somewhere unexpected. Your story might inspire someone else to take their own leap of faith.